a two-time NBA champion and 12-time All-Star, Hakeem Olajuwon.
Oh, man.
You didn't start playing basketball, I think, until you were 15?
I was 17.
You were a handball player and a
Yes.
goalkeeper.
All the children growing up in Nigeria, you have to play soccer. That's like a fundamental.
When I played against Hakeem, who was my idol, I showed him too much respect. You know, when you're battling against a person, you show people respect by showing them none. But Hakeem was just, instead of bowling him in his face,
Most people remember Hakeem Olajuwon as the Dream, the graceful center with footwork like a ballet dancer. But that image only tells half the story. The man who became one of basketball's greatest champions didn't float to the top on skill alone. He fought his way there through intense rivalries, personal vendettas, and battles that tested him physically and mentally. This is the story of the conflicts that forged a legend. When Hakeem arrived at the University of Houston from Lagos, Nigeria, he wasn't polished. He was raw, a former soccer goalkeeper learning basketball at the highest level. His teammate Clyde Drexler, already a star from Sterling High School, wasn't exactly impressed. Early on, Drexler thought the young center struggled offensively and traveled constantly. That lack of respect, that skepticism from his own teammate, lit a fire in Hakeem. He didn't work to please Drexler, he worked to prove him wrong. The University of Houston practices under coach Guy Lewis were brutal, often lasting 3 hours of pure physical and mental warfare. Lewis believed that intensity in practice was the only true measure of readiness. The environment was so demanding that when the energy started to fade, players actually staged fights just to convince their coach they were still competing hard. Hakeem and Drexler, along with their teammates, would pretend to square up when things got slow, performing this theater of aggression to satisfy Lewis. But sometimes, in that pressure cooker, the line between staged and real conflict disappeared completely. The Faye Slama Jama era was built on individual brilliance and showmanship. Dunks were currency, and this focus on style created factions within the locker room. Teammate Benny Anders epitomized this tension when he attempted a flashy reverse dunk in a critical moment. Another player called it one of the most selfish plays he'd ever seen. This was the environment Hakeem navigated, where individual glory often competed with team objectives, where trust was fragile and ego ruled. These weren't just basketball practices. They were daily battles for dominance and respect. If you're enjoying this look into the battles that shaped Hakeem's career, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which NBA rivalry you want covered next. This wasn't a cozy brotherhood, it was survival through competition. The trauma of losing the 1983 NCAA championship to North Carolina State haunted both Hakeem and Drexler. They couldn't fix that failure together because Drexler left for the NBA, leaving Hakeem to carry the weight alone. When they finally reunited on the Rockets in 1995, it wasn't the fairy tale the media portrayed. Drexler had actually given up on the dream of playing with Hakeem again and was preparing to join Seattle instead. The trade to Houston was born from desperation on both sides. Drexler's championship window was closing in Portland, and Hakeem needed help to defend his title with a struggling Rockets team. When they won the 1995 championship together, Hakeem called it his most cherished achievement. Not because it was easy, but because it finally erased the pain of what they couldn't accomplish at Houston 12 years earlier. The hug at center court wasn't just celebration, it was relief, the end of a long, complicated journey that began with doubt and dismissal. Hakeem explicitly stated, "We didn't do it together in college and came back and did it in the pros." That championship validated all the struggles, all the internal fights, all the accusations of selfishness that had plagued them since their college days. Then there was Ralph Sampson, Hakeem's front court partner in the failed Twin Towers experiment. On paper, two 7-footers with guard skills should have been unstoppable. In reality, their partnership was poisoned by jealousy and diverging paths. Before Hakeem even joined the team, Portland had offered Houston the number 2 pick and Clyde Drexler in exchange for Sampson. If the Rockets had accepted, they would have drafted Michael Jordan, creating a trio of Hakeem, Drexler, and Jordan. Instead, they kept Sampson, betting everything on the Twin Towers. The pressure was immense. Sampson had been the number 1 pick in 1983, the established franchise cornerstone. Then Hakeem arrived as the number 1 pick in 1984, immediately threatening that status. The NBA's financial landscape was shifting rapidly, and Hakeem's rookie contract eclipsed what Sampson had signed just a year earlier. Economic disparity fueled locker room tension. As Hakeem ascended, commanding fear and respect with his aggressive, relentless style, Sampson struggled with injuries and began to be viewed as fragile. The jealousy wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about who owned the identity of the franchise. The dysfunction reached a breaking point during the 1986 finals against the Boston Celtics. The Rockets' locker room was reportedly in shambles after losses, with equipment broken and frustration boiling over. Sampson, once the golden child, found himself isolated as the Twin Towers concept collapsed into a one-man show starring Hakeem. The Boston Garden crowd targeted Sampson mercilessly, with signs reading "Ralph Sampson is a sissy" plastered throughout the arena. In the 1980s, calling a 7'4" black man a sissy was more than an insult. It was a racially coded attack, stripping him of the physical dominance and threat associated with his size and race, reducing him to mockery. Hakeem witnessed this abuse firsthand. He internalized the attack on his partner as an attack on their entire identity. That rage exploded in Game 5 when Sampson threw a punch at Celtics guard Jerry Sichting, starting a brawl. But it was Hakeem who escalated it into war. Footage shows him flying into the pile, throwing punches with no regard for consequences. He connected with Larry Bird and Dennis Johnson before being ejected. In that moment, Hakeem shattered any image of the polite African. He showed he would physically fight the icons of the NBA establishment, that he wouldn't be intimidated by the mystique of the Celtics or the hostility of their crowd. The Boston Garden had a long history of racial hostility. Bill Russell, the greatest Celtic of all time, described facing horrendous racism from his own home crowd. By the mid-80s, the Celtics were often culturally positioned as the Great White Hope, a team of smart, fundamental players like Bird, McHale, and Ainge contrasted against the athletic black teams of the league. Hakeem walked into that charged atmosphere as doubly foreign, a black man and an African immigrant. The sissy chants directed at Sampson signaled that the crowd viewed the Rockets not just as opponents, but as targets for degradation. The environment, not any individual player, became something Hakeem hated. He was rejecting a hierarchy that placed the Celtics at the top and dismissed challengers like him. It was a declaration that he would not be bullied, even if it meant fighting an entire team. That violence against the establishment continued. During the Western Conference Finals that same year, Hakeem punched Lakers forward Mitch Kupchak and even tussled with a referee. He was building a reputation, not as soft, but as dangerous. Throughout the 80s and 90s, a xenophobic narrative plagued African players in the NBA. They were stereotyped as soft, nice, naive, easily bullied by tough American inner-city players. Charles Oakley, the enforcer for the Bulls and later the Knicks, built his career on intimidation. But there's a persistent legend that Oakley rarely engaged in prolonged conflict with Hakeem. The rumor, whispered in NBA circles, involves an incident where Hakeem, tired of physical jostling, simply slapped the feared enforcer across the face. The lack of retaliation from Oakley cemented Hakeem's reputation. He refused to submit to xenophobic hazing. He demanded respect through immediate physical consequences. This reputation spread throughout the league. Players knew that Hakeem wouldn't back down, wouldn't absorb punishment quietly. Where other African players might have accepted the stereotype, Hakeem actively destroyed it with every physical confrontation. His willingness to fight back wasn't just about individual moments. It was about changing the narrative entirely, proving that he and players like him deserved respect, not because they were polite, but because they were formidable. But the conflicts weren't just with opponents. In 1992, Hakeem's own franchise betrayed him. The Rockets accused him of faking a hamstring injury to gain leverage in contract negotiations. This accusation carried heavy racial undertones, invoking stereotypes of the greedy or deceptive black athlete. By questioning his integrity and suspending him, the Rockets front office alienated their franchise player. Hakeem's response was furious. He called management stupid in the press and demanded a trade. This period of hatred between player and team is often overlooked, but it hardened Hakeem. It taught him that loyalty in the NBA was conditional, that he had to fight for his worth as viciously off the court as he did on it. Only the purging of the front office salvaged the relationship, but the damage had been done. Hakeem learned he could trust no one completely. Then came 1995 and the rivalry that became personal warfare. David Robinson won the MVP award that year, and Hakeem took it as theft. Robinson was the Admiral, a Naval Academy graduate, polite, articulate, sculpted like a statue. He was the NBA's ideal ambassador, safe and marketable. Hakeem saw him as manufactured, lacking the edge necessary to win when systems broke down. When the MVP was announced, Hakeem gathered his teammates and declared, "He has my trophy." This wasn't a difference of opinion. In Hakeem's mind, Robinson was an unworthy pretender holding stolen property. Before the Western Conference Finals began, Hakeem told his team, "I'm going to David's house to get my trophy." What followed was a public execution. Hakeem didn't just outplay Robinson, he humiliated him. The Dream Shake left Robinson, one of the greatest defensive centers ever, jumping at ghosts. In Game 2, footage shows Robinson flailing helplessly while Hakeem calmly pivoted for layups. Teammate Mario Ely recalled Hakeem saying, "Mario, he's borrowing my trophy. Somebody's in trouble tonight." The statistical dominance was overwhelming. Hakeem averaged 35 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 blocks compared to Robinson's pedestrian numbers. But the psychological damage cut deeper. Hakeem exposed Robinson as a regular season player, stripped the admiral of his rank. Even Robinson's gracious admission that he'd been bamboozled only reinforced the dominance. Hakeem hadn't just beaten him. He'd confused him, outsmarted him, broken his spirit. The rivalry with Shaquille O'Neal was different. It was generational, defined by Shaq's massive ego and Hakeem's cool superiority. Entering the 1995 finals, Shaq was the cultural phenomenon, young and dominant, having just defeated Michael Jordan's Bulls. The media was ready to crown him the new king. Hakeem, the defending champion, was cast as the underdog. The Rockets swept the Magic in 4 games, but the nature of the sweep was psychological. Shaq averaged 28 points, playing well statistically, but he later admitted Hakeem had dogged him out. The key was Hakeem's refusal to engage in Shaq's game. Shaq was used to physical bullying and trash talk, but he found no purchase against Hakeem. When Shaq threw an elbow, Hakeem would calmly say, "Nice elbow, brother," then proceed to score with finesse. This lack of reaction infuriated Shaq. He admitted, "He had me mentally." Shaq's reflection was revealing. "I showed him too much respect." He realized that treating Hakeem with reverence was fatal. This loss transformed Shaq, who vowed never to be nice again, adopting a kill-everyone mentality that defined his Lakers dynasty. In a way, Hakeem created the monster that would dominate the league, but the strangest chapter came after the finals. Shaq, unable to process the humiliation, couldn't let it end. His ego demanded a rematch on his terms. In the weeks following the series, Shaq drafted a note to Hakeem, possibly typed on a typewriter. The message was direct and desperate. "Hakeem, the series may be a done deal, but it ain't over between you and me. Sure, you're pretty good with your team behind you, but I want you one-on-one." This wasn't empty talk. Shaq's camp, working with Taco Bell, organized a legitimate pay-per-view event called The War on the Floor, a $1 million winner-take-all game of one-on-one. The event was set, the hype building, a pop culture spectacle ready to unfold. Then, at the last moment, Hakeem pulled out, citing a sore lower back from lifting weights. The medical excuse was viewed skeptically. The strategic reality was obvious. Hakeem had nothing to gain. He was the NBA champion. He'd swept Shaq in the games that mattered. Why lower himself to a carnival sideshow? By canceling, Hakeem executed the ultimate power move. He denied Shaq the opportunity for redemption, froze the result of the 1995 finals as the final word on their rivalry. Shaq was left with his typed note and bruised ego, forever denied the chance to even the score. That note remains a historical artifact, not of violent hatred, but of competitive insecurity so deep it drove a superstar to challenge a champion to a pickup game for validation. These rivalries weren't accidents. They were the engine of Hakeem's greatness. The dismissal from Drexler forced him to eliminate his weaknesses. The jealousy with Sampson and the racial hostility in Boston taught him he had to fight the establishment physically. The betrayal by his own franchise in 1992 hardened him. The disrespect of the MVP vote turned him into Robinson's nightmare. And Shaq's challenge gave him the chance to assert permanent dominance. The Dream Shake itself, Hakeem's signature move, was more than an offensive weapon. It was survival, a mechanism born from hostility. In a league where Oakley wanted to bully him, where Robinson wanted to outdiscipline him, where Shaq wanted to overpower him, Hakeem developed something that made him untouchable. You couldn't hit what you couldn't catch. The Dream Shake was the physical manifestation of his refusal to be pinned down by narratives or stereotypes. It was evasion, creativity, and dominance fused into one unstoppable motion. The transformation from Angry Hakeem, the player who punched Celtics and slapped opponents, to Hakeem the Dream, the pious Muslim sage, was one of sports' most successful rebrandings. But make no mistake, the 1994 and 1995 championships weren't won by the sage. They were won by the warrior who still carried the fire of every slight, every insult, every moment of disrespect. The Ramadan fasting and spiritual awakening gave him focus, but the fuel came from Shaq's note, from Robinson holding his trophy, from the sissy signs in Boston. What's remarkable is how Hakeem channeled all this conflict into something transcendent. Where other players might have burned out or become consumed by bitterness, Hakeem transformed his anger into art. Every humiliation he experienced became motivation. Every rival who underestimated him became a victim of his evolution. He took the stereotype of the soft African player and obliterated it. He took the doubt from his own teammate and turned it into brotherhood through shared triumph. He took the stolen MVP and reclaimed it on the court in the most decisive way possible. Hakeem Olajuwon is celebrated for grace, and rightfully so, but his grace was forged in conflict. He didn't just dream. He fought through dismissal, racism, betrayal, and jealousy to become one of basketball's greatest champions. Every rival who doubted him, every crowd that mocked him, every front office that undervalued him became fuel for an unstoppable fire. The dream was beautiful, but it was the nightmare he inflicted on his rivals that made him legendary. If this deep dive into basketball history resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed and let me know in the comments which NBA legend's untold story you want explored next. The conflicts that shape greatness are always more fascinating than the highlights suggest.